Now, one of the things that's happened and that's new, is that there has been a breakdown in the legitimacy of the state system and of the states. And that comes from something I have not discussed up to now, which is the historic failure of the anti-systemic movements. And that goes back to the ideologies. When the radicals after 1848 said, well, you can't have spontaneous revolutions, they don't work, we have to organize, they did organize historically, and they organized into several major forms. We have the social movements, which broke down historically then into two main varieties, social democrats and communists, and we had the national liberation movements in the Third World. And what all these movements shared, not what distinguished them, but what they shared, was a strategy which they evolved in the late 19th century, which is what they called, in fact, the two-step strategy. First, take power in the state, then change the world. Because if you don't have power in the state, you can't change the world. And the interesting thing is, you compare those movements in the 1870s and those movements around 1945, you would say they're fairly weak. They really haven't been able to get anywhere. And all of a sudden, from around 1945 to 70, they blossomed in political strength to such an incredible point that they did, in fact, take power everywhere. The communist world, one-third, Asia, Africa, Latin America, basically in the hands of national liberation movements, and the Western world, the Social Democratic parties at least, were sharing power. So they suddenly came to power, and they could suddenly be judged on the strategy, whether they in fact could change the world once they had really achieved state power. And basically, I argue that 1968 as a world revolution was a revolution of those who judged these movements to have failed in their promise to have changed the world. Now, what conclusion, therefore, culturally did people draw from that? Withdrawing a sense that the movements would, in fact, change the world if they came to power, and therefore that they were, in any sense, quote, revolutionary, really, more than just another political structure. And therefore withdrawing also their sense of legitimacy of the state. Because, you see, once you believe that the movements will change the world, in fact, it doesn't make you more radical. It makes you more patient. And then say, okay, well, and the movements have to come to power, and you have to give them time, and then they can change the world, etc. So it was really a very depoliticizing thing. Now, if you lose your faith in that, then you see no reason why these state structures, which presently look so bad, should be sustained if you don't think that they're inevitably going to improve, which is what the movements had argued. So I see a real collapse in the legitimacy of state structures because of the collapse of the legitimacy of the belief in, the faith in anti-systemic movements.